Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I hope you've had a great day so far and that you've been enjoying London Web3 Week and Zebu Live. I want to thank the team at Flight 3 for having me this afternoon to moderate this discussion on KYC, crypto compliance, and all these very fascinating topics. More often than not, I do this type of sessions abroad, so it's very nice to be here in London in this wonderful weather. A change from Singapore, definitely, and from Austin, for that matter. For those who don't know me, Johnny kindly introduced myself. I am Sol. I'm head of partnerships for CoinDesk. I am based here in the UK, and I am delighted to be joined by this excellent lineup of regulatory experts. As you can see, we lack gender diversity in this panel. We do not lack knowledge, understanding. We don't lack glamour, obviously. So we only have 40 minutes for this, or thereabouts, so I will let my panelists introduce themselves, starting by Sophie.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Sophie Bowler. I'm the Chief Compliance Officer of Zodi Custody. So Zodi Custody is born out of and owned by Standard Chartered, and we're a crypto custodian for institutional clients, recently expanded across the globe, UK, Europe, Hong Kong, Singapore, and even more jurisdictions. I've been at Zodia for about a year and a half, previous experience in consulting and government.
Natalia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia, and I'm a Director of Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs at Merco Science. This is a blockchain analytics firm, so we offer different on-chain compliance solutions, for example, for private firms operating in a crypto market, but also we support efforts of regulatory authorities and law enforcement agencies to track crypto and make sure that illicit actors are actually captured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Delphine. I'm a policy lead at Solidus Labs, where we provide trade surveillance system for crypto assets provider. I'm also the founder of the Crypto Telegram compliance and legal chat with 1,200 members. If you are interested in compliance, please join the chat. We share best practices and knowledge. And I also have a podcast where I interview Chief Compliance and Legal Officer, as well as regulators on MiCA. Sophie was one of my guests. And previously to that, I worked as a Chief Compliance and Legal Officer in exchanges. I've done that for 7 years now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte. I think I'm a wolf in sheep's clothing here, being from traditional finance, so apologies, everyone. But yeah, I'm from Deutsche Bank. I'm in their digital asset team covering regulatory adherence. And my background is I worked in an exchange before this, and then I worked in the government working on their seizure of crypto asset regulation.
Excellent. So well done to the programming team for curating a very diverse pool of talent. We have different perspectives on KYC and crypto. So as traditional finance is sort of considering taking into crypto offerings for their clients. Why don't we start talking about KYC and how that can become a little bit more streamlined? Delphine, would you like to take the first point?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, I think I'm going to give you a lawyer answer. There is a yes and there is a no. So there is a yes in the sense that, tooling in order to do KYC, know your customer, to onboard customer into your platform has improved. You can do online identification, and there is also a new way of doing online identification. You have something called non-dot verification, which I think is very powerful, where the user doesn't have to upload their documentation anymore, which reduces the risk of fraud and also reduce the friction during the onboarding process, because the customer can just reply to a few questions. But on the other hand, no, in the sense that there is always more regulation. And when you do know your customer, why you're doing it? You're doing it because the goal is to prevent financial crime. You don't want to onboard users that are going to launder money through your platform. Financial crime comes from, there is a crime, right? There is a drug dealer killing people, drug trafficking. You don't want that on your platform. So regulation are picking up, and and what you want to do as a compliance officer, you need to ask the customer a lot of questions. And if there is more regulation, you need to get more information out of your customer. So yes, it's more streamlined, but no, in the sense like we need to ask more. Like we will talk about the travel rules. The travel rule will have and have actually in the UK an impact in the customer journey. So not really more streamlined. You know, it's a balance, right?
It is, yes, there is a balance. There are, new risks that will continue to come up as other risks are being mitigated. Sophie, is there anything you'd like to add on the KYC perspective?
Yeah. I mean, I think just, my background's in traditional finance. At the end of the day, traditional finance, crypto, it's all the same regulatory framework. We've got the same legislation and it's the same broad controls. So what we've learned from traditional finance, we can very much leverage into crypto. But as Delphine said, there's new technologies now. We've got a blockchain, we didn't have that before. There's new risks associated with crypto that we've never seen before. So, KYC is having to adapt and compliance officers are having to adapt to that ultimately. So I think there's sort of new challenges and I guess still a bit of a way to go to sort of further streamline it. But I think there's been a lot of discussions recently around AI as well. That keeps coming up all the time. And I think that's another area that's going to help improve it. For digital asset firms and the traditional financial industries.
If I may add, like on AI, it may improve it, but it also brings new risk. With the deep fake one is a really big risk because if you do online identification, I'm not sure all the provider can actually really spot, when there is a use of deep fake, where fraudsters, I will use made-up videos and made-up pictures that are really good, right?
Mm-hmm. Is there, Charlotte, I wanted to ask you, are there specific things that TradFi can learn from crypto in their approach?
I'd like to say that crypto and TradFi can learn from each other, and also I don't think we can really, and I think people in the room might disagree, but separating them now, I think actually they're coming closer and closer together. So I think the lessons learned is actually the similarities between the two, and it's bringing into the point as well that Sophie said that actually a lot of the regulation and a lot of the tools being used in crypto are already being used in traditional finance. And you can see the similarities. So transaction monitoring, for example, that's in banking already, that's there, and crypto uses that. Whereas now, traditional finance, we're using things like KYC, blockchain analytics, to help us. So I think actually learning from each other and moving down this road together, you can actually build out incredibly robust systems using parts of traditional finance and parts of crypto as well.
Natalia, and as a service provider, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of how you're helping?
I think that it's quite important to know that currently we have more tools at our disposal, and we can actually blend this traditional financial crime metrics with on-chain analytics because we have blockchain, which is inherently transparent. So it enables us risk management and also tracing of the funds. So we can blend these two different criteria and generate a holistic overview of the customer, whether it's a natural person, whether it's a VASP. But it's also quite important to know that there are few red flags that are traditional finance red flags, so they will be present in every industry regardless. It's not just inherent to crypto, but also we have virtual-specific red flags that could be implemented at transaction monitoring level. So we have guidances from regulatory authorities, but also industry associations such as GMLSG here in the UK or FinCEN in the US, where we have the red flags dedicated for specific crime typology. So I think it's quite important to understand these typologies to implement these rules in your transaction monitoring rules. But I think it's also important to know the importance of localized approach to KYC, because I also come from traditional banking, so we used to have a global policy, but we actually had to implement the nuances that were there because different jurisdictions approach KYC differently. So it may be different type of data that has to be collected, but also different ways of verification. So for example, in Germany, you need a video verification as a part of your KYC process if the service is offered in a digital way. So I think it's just important to remember that we have this automation, but we still have to make sure that we comply with local regulations, which may be different in different jurisdictions.
Yes, we were, something that came up in our prep calls was, I think, two things. One, and it's what we're going to dive into now, the role of the compliance officer and how that is changing, and also the fact that there are so many tools available. But I think it was you, Charlotte, who mentioned how important it is to know how to use those tools to make the most of it. It's a coincidence that we are all women on this panel, but clearly this seems to be an interesting way into crypto for women, compliance, and this part of this area of the business. So if I wanted to come to you about the role of the compliance officer, because we feel that there are probably quite a few founders in the audience, and what would be the role at the early stages of a project when it comes to compliance? What would the compliance role be?
Yeah, I think like looking at the digital asset industry where we are now, we're still quite a young industry. We're still quite in the early stages, and there's so much innovation ahead of us. And of course, we've just started to be brought under the regulatory perimeter. So legislation started to be drafted, and we're starting to need to have to get licenses and registrations, and that's ultimately going to sort of be, unfortunately, one of the reasons how we continue to survive and innovate. And I think this is where, particularly in the digital asset industry, the role of a compliance officer is really critical, because it's the responsibility of that compliance officer to make sure the regulator's comfortable with what you're sort of enabling and what you're doing, to show them how you're complying with the legislation, and to help the development of products and services in a compliant way. So really to enable the business to continue to innovate, and ultimately, of course, to keep our licenses and authorizations, because if we don't do that, innovation will be stifled because we won't be able to continue. So I think this is where, particularly in such a young industry, that's why the compliance officer's role is really critical, and we need to get involved at an early stages. So really be involved in the strategy, really work closely with the product team such that we can help and support and advise on how to develop new products in line with the requirements and in line with what the regulator would be happy with. And then ultimately that will enable innovation and further thriving of the industry. So I think it's really, really helping to enable the industry. From
the start. It's hard as well, because innovation will always move quicker than regulation. So sometimes it's difficult to not be perceived as business enablers. Sometimes compliance, the other blockers, and then don't let us do anything. But it shouldn't be like that. I think that if there is I'd like to know the perspective from the panel, but I think that the message that we would like to leave here with the founders is that compliance being embedded from the start of the project facilitates growth. Because you will not be doing things that you are not supposed to be doing, let's say, to speak in plain language.
Yeah, and even in areas that are not regulated, it's just to help ensure that we're sort of, I guess, doing it in the best way possible and sort of making regulators comfortable for it in future. So. Yeah,
and is there anything anyone would like to add to that?
Just to say that, if you've got a good group or one compliance officer that is good and has a good head on them, you will have a competitive advantage in the market. You will go further than others that do not have a compliance officer that is there at the start with you. It will help.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think you need to think when people ask me what do you do and I say compliance, they're like, oh no compliance. I'm like, when you build a project, as Sophie mentioned, compliance is an enabler. We're not here to say no. We're here to find ways to make the business happen. So you will come to me and say, this is my project. I'll say, okay, that's your project. So what you want to do? What is your budget? Because if you want to get a license, then it's going to be expensive. But maybe there is another way to start your project without getting a license. But doing it in another way, you just reshape the product and you go step by step. And I think a good compliance officer is someone that is creative and has a business mindset. And I think all of us who are here, we have the business mindset. We want the business to thrive. And it's very important that you have a compliance person to help you design your product and be here with you to make it successful so that you comply with regulation and you don't have a surprise when you launch a project.
It's interesting you said about being creative. I think that's it as well. I think actually, and maybe it's just, if you look at all the women on the panel in compliance, maybe that's it. Maybe we do have creativity that comes into this sort of area, and it's just interesting to see. Observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think that the product compliance is quite important here, because we should design the product in a compliant way from the very beginning, because there are so many areas where we are not exactly sure what would be the regulatory treatment of the product or service that you provide. So it's quite important to embed it at the very beginning of your journey, so later you don't have regulator knocking at your door because they say, hey, you are actually within the perimeter of our regulatory review. So it's particularly important in case of DeFi, because the regulation is not exactly clear there, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on. But this product design, compliance by design is very important here. And just to basically agree with what you just said before, I also worked at banking before, and us as compliance people, we were just seen as an obstacle because we were saying no to earning money. But actually, on the other hand, we prevented business from getting a regulatory fine, which is obviously a huge reputational risk as well, not to mention financial. So I think we just need a general shift in mentality to see compliance officers, as you all said, as enablers of the business, rather than an obstacle that just says, no, you can't do that. That's not what we are trying to do. We just want to make sure that the business can actually grow and allocate resources efficiently, rather than pay a huge monetary fine because we were not compliant and decided to go beyond our risk appetite.
It's a very important point, and not to be disregarded from the early stages of the startups. Right. We're not going to dive deeply into regulation. No, we don't need another regulatory panel. But there was one point in particular that we wanted to address, because it's been a year on. It's been the UK. Europe will be implementing it as well. Delphine, I know you can be very passionate about it, so please curb your enthusiasm. Tell us a little bit about what you think about the travel rule, whether a travel rule strategy is really needed, whether it was beneficial, it wasn't beneficial. What's your view on this?
Tricky question.
How long have you got?
I'm going to spoke my heart as usual. So first, maybe the audience doesn't know what is travel rule. Who knows what is travel rule in here? Okay, so nobody. So travel rule, you have that in traditional finance. So when you want to do a wire transfer, you are being asked by your bank to tell who is the beneficiary of the transfer. So generally, you need to put the name, possibly the address of the beneficiary. Then the bank got this information. I want to transfer crypto to Charlotte over there. My account is at BitMEX. Our account is at Coinbase. BitMEX is going to say, hey, Delphine, you want to transfer 1 Bitcoin to who? So I'm going to say, I want to transfer 1 Bitcoin to Charlotte. Oh, okay. Then I'm going to have to put the detail of Charlotte, the wallet address, and then BitMEX is going to send this information to Coinbase. This is basically the travel rule, so exchange of information about the originator and the beneficiary. Why do we have that? In 2019, the Financial Action Task Force decided that this rule that it was applying in traditional finance has to apply in crypto to fight financial crime. And you're like, what? Why? This goes against the purpose. Well, they decided it would be like that. But my point is in crypto, we use blockchain analytics tools, and we can see if the address has been exposed to any type of illicit activities. You can see that. This is in your face, it's there. So why do you need information with the name and person to go from point A to B, where you can actually already fight financial crime? So that's my opinion on travel rule. But it's there, and in the UK, crypto asset providers needs to comply with it since 2023. In the EU, it's coming on December 30, 2024. So how do you build up a travel rule strategy? Because you have no choice, right? So I know to do that. My advice will be to look at your counterparties, like who are the main counterparties with who your customers are trading. So you will have a list of maybe 30, 50 counterparties. And what I did at the time, I called up the compliance officer there, and I was like, which solution are you using in order to exchange the data? I made my little inquiry. I was like, okay, you guys are using this solution, so we should prioritize using solution X, because the goal is to enable the crypto to go from point A to B and enable the exchange of information to comply with the regulation. But when you look at a travel rule solution, I think there are things that are really important to look at, because we are talking about personal data, and some solution will keep the personal data on their own server. I will not recommend that at all. Personal opinion, again, expressing my own view, not my company's. And you also need to look at interoperability. Is the solution interoperable with another solution for messaging system? Because if you're at BitMEX, your customer wants to transact with Coinbase, with a Bit in Korea, maybe with another exchange, I don't know, like Bitstamp or whatever. They may not use the same solution to talk, right? So it's important that you have a solution that can talk with other solutions, and be careful of what they do with the personal data. Because as an exchange, you already hold your personal data, so there's already a pod there. When you do identity verification, the data are already there. So I will, recommend
be careful with on the data side as well. Sophie, is there anything you'd like to add on this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were discussing before, we were talking about the challenges. Is it working now? Does it work for crypto? I think, and as Delphine said, it's been implemented in the UK now for just over a year. But when you look at the original legislation that was implemented in fiat, as Delphine just explained there, it works in fiat because of the Swift messaging system that automatically enables transfer of data as part of the transactions. That was specifically amended to bring crypto in. But as we know, crypto, we don't have a Swift messaging system in crypto. So then the question begs, well, how do we actually exchange this information? We have to go to vendor tools, to support in doing this. But there's a number of vendor tools on the market. They're not all interoperable. Many countries haven't yet still implemented the travel rule. And I think, the nature of crypto and the blockchain is that the transaction's affected, it goes straight to a wallet. You can't really stop it. It goes to that wallet. So I think at the moment, it is definitely still a bit of a challenge for compliance officers, I would say. And it's still a bit of an early stage. We haven't got any regulatory sort of guidance or
And we can argue, but that's a whole different panel. We can argue whether we actually need it in a decentralized world. So we'll program that some other time.
But maybe if there is one takeaway, just plan, because travel rule has a huge impact on customer journey. So plan it. It's very important to plan, test it, and make sure it does not impact negatively your customer journey. That's very important. That's, I think, one take, just plan.
Thank you. We're going to move on to investigating crime, since we have a product expert as well. When I started crypto, I consider myself an industry veteran. I've been in crypto for 4 years already, which is a long time. But when I started looking at, moving into the industry, all the information that I could find was either hostile or, if you Google anything related to crypto, and we have to bear in mind that we are preaching to people who are in the industry. The moment you step out in the outside crypto, in the world outside of crypto, nobody knows what you're talking about, or things that you are, dealing with criminals, essentially. I think what we would like to discuss is what are the misconceptions around investigating crime on the blockchain, and whether crime exists, and whether crypto is a facilitator, or on the contrary, it puts people off. So Natalia, I'd like to give you the mic for this.
Yeah, so I think it's quite important to note that crypto is obviously not inherently criminal. This is just a medium to achieve certain goals. So just like with cash or internet or any financial asset or other asset, even like a car, it's just facilitator. We don't have such thing as crypto crime. We just have traditional crimes, and criminals just use different tools to facilitate that crime. So I would just like to say that this is a huge misconception. When I see titles crypto crime, there is no such thing. There is such thing like crypto enabled crime, because crypto can be enabler of the crime. But it's not inherently criminal itself, because it's the behavior of the user that will constitute criminality, but not the tool itself. So it's quite important that the crime happens first, and we usually have a list of predicate offenses in every jurisdiction that tell you what is the actual crime. It can be obviously CSAM, it can be drug dealing, it can be terrorist financing. So this is the crime we should focus on, not on the tool that facilitates it. But speaking about that, we have this transparency associated with the blockchain. So we can actually see what happens. We don't have that visibility in traditional finance systems, so we should make the best out of it, because this enables us to track the funds. And speaking about the funds, we usually identify the exit nodes, so we know where the funds are exiting. And this is where blockchain analytics play a crucial role, because we are able to link these addresses to real-world entities. There are obviously different methods that we could discuss separately, how you can obtain such data. But this is bringing me to the point that crypto is also not a preferred method for money laundering because of that transparency. If we are able to see how the flow of funds looks like, if we are able to identify who's the owner of that specific wallet, why they would like to use crypto more than other traditional methods such as cash. So even when we look at risk assessment, for example, conducted this year by Treasury in the US, they specifically say that crypto is not preferred method. They still use cash and other informal sectors to facilitate money laundering, because crypto gives you visibility, gives you huge visibility in ecosystem, and you're at risk of being caught. So I would say that it's very important to understand the crime involved in the first place, analyze how it works, because you have to look for the red flags as compliance officer. You don't necessarily think if this is crypto or not, because these red flags are like common indicators that you will find both in traditional finance and crypto. So I think that this is quite important to note.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that crypto is it's bad. It just has bad press. At Coindesk, we are trying to turn that around and not just report about, bad things that happen in crypto. So also good things. If you're happy to move on from crime, we can talk about trade finance and traditional finance and crypto. So how financial crime controls differ or are similar between traditional finance and crypto. As more traditional financial institutions, banks are beginning to offer crypto services to clients. So we have someone from Deutsche here. So Charlotte, is it very difficult to be on your job? How do you manage inside Deutsche, and how are you convincing people to offer digital assets?
I think now it's, I don't know if my mic's working. I think it's a lot easier now to convince people to get into digital assets from a traditional finance perspective, for two reasons really, and we have touched on it
throughout the panel. But it really is the introduction of regulation. You see the traditional finance actors now sort of coming into the crypto space, and that's because they're, these guardrails, these safety rails from regulation are sort of being put in place that allow to draw us down a path that we, think is safe for the bank and is safe for consumers. Also, I think as well, the regulation, I'll move on to the second point. I think with technology is the second point. You've got the regulation there, it's driving us in the right direction, it's keeping us in check. But then you get the technology, as mentioned earlier, about blockchain analytics. Again, is just building up these safety nets where traditional financial institutions like banks are just coming into play now and understanding it. And we all have very sort of low risk appetite, really. We don't like taking risks. And I think these building blocks are now in place to allow us to sort of come into the market. That being said, sort of turning it around to sort of what's different. Again, I think there's a spectrum of there's a huge spectrum in the crypto industry of what's going on versus sort of where traditional finance is coming in. But where we are coming in regards to financial crime, I think there's actually a lot of similarities in the controls that are in place. Mm-hmm. We're looking at what we need to do to facilitate crypto in a banking environment, and actually, it's the way we're looking at it really is going, right, well, okay, what's in the bank already? And you look at things, the controls in place and think, oh, actually that can work in our crypto arm. And then you think, well, actually, maybe we need to tweak that slightly, but we can do that as well. And then you look at the gaps and you say, right, what are the gaps? How are we going to build out this really incredibly robust system? And the gaps there is where crypto really comes into its full force, and how the blockchain analytics tools are so integral to our business, at least in that they fill the gaps. They create this sort of robust system that we can now bring crypto in and in a safe way within our risk appetite. And it really is sort of, that's the way we're moving. Crypto is really just enhancing our tools, and it's great. It just means that we have a safer system than we did before, and it allows us to go on the crypto journey.
So what you're saying essentially is that it works both ways.
It does.
So the traditional financial arm can learn
it comes
from
back out. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Sophie, you were nodding. Is there anything you'd like to add on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Zodi is owned by Standard Chartered, and we implement Standard Chartered's policies and standards. So I directly implement sort of bank grade standards, but of course, so it's largely all applicable. It's just sort of tweaks here and there, further enhancements, as Charlotte said, with blockchain analytics. Everything we've sort of learned from traditional finance and what the regulator expects there, we can apply here. So it's we're just sort of utilising our previous experience to apply to crypto.
Interesting. And then one other point I wanted to touch from, we've had so many things to talk about. We had to narrow down the topics. It's how compliance operates in decentralized finance. Is there really a need for compliance as well? And how do we manage privacy, as we were talking about earlier about the travel rule? How do we manage privacy with compliance and doing the right thing?
Yeah, no, I can kick off. Yeah, I think so. It's interesting with DeFi. There's a few key things that sort of come to mind in terms of sort of challenges for compliance officers, and I think we've already touched on it a bit in this panel. But DeFi is sort of unregulated at the moment. There's a bit of lack of regulatory clarity around how certain DeFi models can be classified. And I spend so much of my time on staking, so I'm going to use staking as an example. It's still not under the regulatory scope, but we know the regulator's got an interest in it. So although staking's not regulated, I still, from a compliance perspective, have to make sure and be comfortable with the staking models that Zodia is enabling, and to make sure that we're not sort of enabling financial crime and we can keep the regulators happy. So, but that regulatory clarity is a bit of a challenge. And then I think just sort of second, because it's still developing, I think the knowledge across the industry is still sort of building up. So I think there's so much need for compliance officers in the industry to get together to discuss these much, much more, to bring the knowledge up, and then also to feed that to regulators as well, to sort of feed into their regulatory position, because it's still just developing and we're still so early, but regulation will come. So
yes, it's and again, as we were saying before, regulation tends to catch up with innovation and with product development as well. Right.
But yes, I think like as an industry, we have a window and an opportunity here to actually work together to come up with standards and compliance that may apply in DeFi before the regulation come to us. Because if the regulator takes the initiative, they will say, here's the framework, off you go, you apply. You agree or you disagree, you will have to do whatever they want you to do. But if as an industry we come up and we say, look, we as an industry come up with a certain standard, we think we can have these controls in place here, and then come to the regulator and ask, have a dialogue with the regulator in order to make sure that we are aligned and the regulation is not coming from them, because most of the time they also do not understand. There was a workshop with ESMA, which is a security regulator of the European Union, on October 1st on staking, right? And they really invited all the industry players to talk about staking. What are the risks in staking? What are the different forms of staking? So there's many different forms, and different forms implies different risk, which implies different controls. So the regulator is also keen to learn more, so we can see that there is a gap in their knowledge, and this is where we should come up with, all together, really support each other instead of competing with each other. This is something that is so important. And I think here we are all aligned. I think in compliance we are really willing to work together in order to, improve the industry and make it better.
Natalia, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of policy challenges?
Actually,
in
speaking
DeFi?
about staking, I think that ESMA actually clarified that MiCAR applies to staking if there is some sort of custody.
Yeah. So, if there is custody, yes.
Yeah. But just speaking generally about DeFi, because in the EU, MiCAR technically applies to services that are partially decentralized, but fully decentralized models are exempted. But the problem here is that I think that many people confuse decentralization with disintermediation and automation. So it's quite important for product people to actually understand these three concepts. And also just to know that decentralization is not an absolute concept. So it operates on a spectrum. So you can also look into a different DeFi stacks, because technically when you have DeFi ecosystem, you can still provide different services, whether it's, for example, lending or trading. And these stacks may be completely different. They may have different governance models. So there are a number of things, number of metrics that you could look into to see if the project is decentralized. But I think that ESMA itself clarified that it's very difficult to say if this project is decentralized or not. And I think it's quite difficult for product builders, because they have to understand what meets the criteria of being sufficiently decentralized, which in my view, it's ridiculous, because there are so many metrics that you could look into, and where is this line where something is decentralized or is not decentralized? Because in my view, such thing as decentralization doesn't really exist. So we have to entertain the concept of sufficiently decentralized, but again, we need definitely more clarity on that.
Thank you. The clock is flashing, which means we've run out of time. Sorry,
No.
we have gone on and on and on. I hope we will leave you with the message that compliance officers are there to enable business, that there are very sort of important tools that people can use to facilitate the role of the compliance officers. And you can find us all on LinkedIn if there's anything that you'd like to ask. Thank you for staying to the end of the panels, those who did. Enjoy the rest of Cebu Live, and please thank my panelists. Thank you.